Welcome to my channel, Brainies. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the topic Proprioceptive Neuromuscular Facilitation, shortly been abbreviated as PNF. PNF, which is the Proprioceptive Neuromuscular Facilitation, it is a sort of stretching technique that can improve the range of motion. Many therapists use this PNF to help the people regain their range of motion after injury or surgery. It can also be used by athletes to improve their flexibility. PNF basically can help to strengthen the muscles. So the history of PNF is as follows. PNF can boost the passive range of motion and the active range of motion. It was first initially developed at the Kabbat Kaiser Institute from 1946 to 1951 by the neurophysiologist Hermann Kabbat and the physical therapist Margaret Knott. She was popularly called as Maggie. PNF was initially developed for people with neurological conditions such as poliomyelitis. Later on, this PNF was expanded to treat musculoskeletal conditions. The PNF stretching technique can also be used by athletes as well as non-athletes to improve the performance. Studies have found out that doing PNF stretches before exercises can boost the performance in the exercises such as jogging. Benefits of PNF stretching. PNF stretching can improve the range of motion. It can also boost the muscle flexibility and strength. It can increase the range of motion. By stretching or lengthening the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon organs through PNF, it can increase the range of motion. Recent research has indicated that the PNF stretching may be the most effective method of stretching to increase the range of motion. Studies have shown that PNF can increase the muscle flexibility. In particular, PNF can boost the hamstring and gastrocnemius muscle flexibility. It can strengthen the muscle also. Let us see the patterns of PNF. So, there are patterns for upper extremity and lower extremity. In PNF patterns of upper extremity, we have diagonal patterns of flexion and extension pattern. So, we categorize this as D1 flexion and D1 extension. Similarly, D2 flexion and D2 extension. The first pattern of D1 flexion. This is the diagram depicting the D1 flexion, D1 extension, D2 flexion and D2 extension. Let us see the first case, which is the D1 flexion pattern. So the D1 flexion pattern is shoulder remains flexion, it is adduction and external rotation. So the shoulder will be in flexion, adduction and external rotation. Elbow will be in flexion position. Forearm will be in supination. Wrist will be in flexion and radial deviation. Fingers will be in flexion. The example for this particular type of D1 flexion pattern is, we can just state it as eating or drinking. This is a picture depicting the D1 flexion pattern. The next pattern is the D1 extension pattern, where the shoulder remains extended, abducted and internally rotated. Elbow will be in extended position. Forearm remains in pronated position. Wrist will be in extension and ulnar deviation. Fingers will be in extension. So the example we could quote for this particular type of D1 extension will be driver's seat belt. That is, when we are just putting the side seat belt, this particular position can be seen. So this is the picture for the D1 extension pattern. Or even you can take the example of opening the door, opening or closing the side door of the car. The next pattern is the D2 flexion pattern. Here the shoulder will be in flexion, abduction and external rotation. Elbow will be in flexed position. Forearm will be in supination. Wrist will be in extension and radial deviation. Fingers will be in extended position. Example for this particular D2 flexion pattern will be like picking up the sword. So you could take the example as picking up the sword. So this is the picture depicting the D2 flexion pattern. And the next one is the D2 extension pattern. Shoulder will be in extension, adduction and internal rotation. Elbow will be in extension. Forearm will be in pronation. Wrist will be in flexion and ulnar deviation. Finger will be in flexion. Example for this is the first example I told you, like picking up the sword. The next example for D2 extension, you can mention it as returning the sword in the particular same position. And even you can just quote the example of the seat belt, that is a passenger side seat belt. So this is the PNF patterns for upper extremity. We'll move on to the PNF patterns of lower extremity. So here also you have D1 flexion, D1 extension, D2 flexion and D2 extension. So the D1 flex pattern is hip will remain in flexion, adduction and external rotation. Knee will be in flexion. Ankle will be in dorsiflexion and in inversion. Toes will remain in extension. So example for this particular type of D1 flexion pattern is, you can just say it as kicking a soccer ball or even crossing of legs wearing the lower extremity garments. So this is the example for PNF pattern. The first one represents the D1 flexion pattern. So let us move on to the next one, which is D1 extension pattern. Hip will remain in extension, abduction and internal rotation. Knee will be in extended position. Ankle will be in plantar flexion. Toes will be in flexion. And example for this type is, that is the D1 extension, will be the skateboarding. Okay, or even you can say it as an example of starting a motorbike. So the second picture depicting the D1 extension pattern. We'll quickly move on to the D2 flexion pattern. So hip will be in flexion, abduction and internal rotation. Knee will be in flexion. Ankle will be in dorsiflexion and inversion. Toes will be in extension. Example for this is riding a motorbike, that is by side kicking. So this is the picture depicting the third picture depicting the D2 flexion. The next one is the D2 extension. Hip will remain in extension, adduction and external rotation. Knee will be in extension. Ankle will be in plantar flexion and inversion. Toes will be in flexion. So the example for this, you can just mention it as bowling. So this is a picture, the fourth picture depicting the PNF patterns. The last pattern, that is the D2 extension. So that's it with today's video. Thank you for watching. Kindly support by subscribing and sharing. Meet you all in next video. Thank you once again.